Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server-related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features, or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Compañeros, welcome to episode 114. It's good to have you on the SQL Trail again.
Hey, Carlos. Episode 114. This sounds like a fun one. Episode 114. This sounds like a fun one.
Yes. So we're piggybacking a little bit off of a conversation we had at the Compañero conference now that we're on the other side of it and recording sessions afterwards. One of the interesting things that we did at the conference, and I'd like to continue, and we'll talk about more of this in our postmortem, but the idea was we wanted to leave some time or some unstructured time where attendees could submit topics that they wanted to talk about, which we did. And then the attendees voted on the topic. So everybody got to contribute, and then we voted. And one of the topics that came up was this idea of how did you get started in consulting? And so we thought we would, we recorded this and we had it, of course, during the conference. And then we thought we would make it available to you, the podcast listener.
Yep. And this one was suggested by Aaron Hayes.
That's right. Yeah. So Aaron out of Chicago, shout out to him.
Oh, shout outs, Carlos.
We do, I guess. So keeping with the conference trend, John Schwizik, I think I'm saying that right. John, if I didn't get that last name right, I apologize. But this was an interesting event that developed as well in that some of the other conferences that we go to, and again, the event was 2 days. So you get to know people, right? We were heavy on interaction.
Yep.
And one of the other sessions that was developed was SSIS. And so John, who was an attendee, had been doing quite a bit in SSIS. And as the conversation had jumped up, he had responded to a couple of things. So when we actually had this session, we actually invited Doug, who'd given a session previously, and John up, and they led that discussion on SSIS. And so there were no slides. It literally started with a couple of questions. And then they started just bringing up a console and just kind of, hey, this is what we do, and giving thoughts. But you can see a picture of a console and just kind of, hey, this is what we do, and giving thoughts and experiences. And I thought it was very, very cool that, again, the kind of that contribution can come from anywhere.
Yep.
And if you were following the Twitter notice, and we'll put it up on the show notes episode for today, but you can see a picture of John up there leading that session.
Well, maybe next time when we do our call for speakers, we should open it up to the previous attendees first.
That's right. In fact, he did say afterwards that he would be interested in coming back and speaking.
Yep.
Which we're going to make some changes there to that whole process as well. So it'll be interesting.
Yep. All right.
Another shout out, there are way too many to mention, but this week I attended our local high school for Career Day. And I've actually done this for a couple of years now. And I live in a very blue collar area, right? So you can take that as you see it. But so lots of families, so the idea of kind of being in our area are not college educated, right? So that's kind of, I guess, how I'm looking at that. And so, the high schools, they have a lot of trouble from a demographics perspective. We tend to be on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. And so, this idea of kind of being able to break out and, these kids have an uphill road. Anyway, so I was there and we've been talking, and I wanted to get across or extend this idea of the power of the network and why making connections is important, and then connecting with the right people, right? And there's an investment in that. And we've talked a little bit about on this program or on the podcast before. And so what I did, it was kind of spur of the moment, so it wasn't as planned as I would have liked to, but I went ahead and I took a selfie with the class. I posted it up on Twitter, and I said, hey, this is what I'm doing, put in the hashtag SQL family, and then said, please kind of that power of community and where it goes. And it was super interesting. Obviously, lots of comments came in, but then just seeing, I think, the breadth. So while I was at the school, so I was at the school for 5 hours, and while I was there, and then the tweet continued to get likes and whatnot afterwards, but it went as far as Brazil, right? People commenting, which they thought was kind of interesting. And then all the various states.
Nice.
And so, we had several people just reply, several people retweeted, and then, of course, liking. And then you kind of do some analytics on that tweet, and they were able to see, again, that idea of, my followers, which I think I have around 700, it went way beyond my own network, right? But it was because people knew who I was, and I was asking for something that was fairly easy to do, and they could feel like they were helping.
Right.
And so, it was an interesting little experiment.
Okay. Really cool.
Yeah.
So I guess the thanks goes out to all of your followers who retweeted, and all of their followers who commented or retweeted as well.
That's right. Who connected and got in on that. I really appreciate it. So
yeah, interesting experiment there.
That's right. Okay. Time for a little SQL Server in the news. So this one, and there are a couple more announcements for Ignite that we haven't quite gotten through, but this one I thought was interesting, and we'll see how it goes. My understanding is that it's currently in preview, and we've talked about Azure Data Factory on the program before, although it was really in its infancy and has definitely gained traction a bit now. They are now allowing you to deploy SQL Server integration packages to Azure.
Oh, nice.
Right? Now, there are some parameters around it, right? But the Azure Data Factory is ultimately what's going to be powering that. And there are some limitations as to what you can connect to and whatnot. But that idea of being able to get SSIS in Azure is picking up some momentum. And I think it will, they'll continue to work on it, and it will be a little bit more usable for those who are more familiar with the GUI interface.
So perhaps it's time for us to do an episode at some point in the future on SSIS in Azure and get someone who knows a lot about that.
That's right. Which, interestingly enough, we are getting ready for Summit. And so that is the time that I like to go out and make connections with some of those program managers and the MVPs and whatnot. I will definitely put that on the list of people to reach out to.
All right.
So we should probably go ahead and mention, we don't have all the details yet, but we could probably go ahead and mention what we're trying to do at Summit.
Yes. Well, we're both going to be there.
Woohoo!
And we're trying to sort of get an after hours, some kind of a gathering together.
That's right.
We're still working through the details on that right now, but a compañero and podcast listener get together where we can just hang out and chat for a while.
That's right. Do kind of like a happy hour type thing. Again, those details are still forthcoming. However, I will give you a little sneak peek, and that is it will be to your advantage to leave a review on iTunes. So we're going to work out some incentive. And so for those of you who have already done that, thank you. If you haven't, we'll invite you to go over to iTunes and leave a comment or a review. And that will be key. That will be key, right? To well, not key. You're welcome to, obviously you can come out, but we'll do something special for those who have left feedback.
So if somebody wants to attend that after hours drinks, whatever we're calling the event,
right,
how can they reach out to us?
Yes, well, so obviously through social media, you can hit us up on email as well. So probably, I guess, through Twitter or LinkedIn, right? It's going to be probably the easiest way. So one of those two, I'm assuming you're on that social media. We'll make the information available, and we'll put it up on our show notes page for today's episode and future episodes. Today's show notes episode is going to be at SQLDataPartners.com/consulting.
Or at SQLDataPartners.com/114 for the episode number.
And so that will probably be the best way to get that information. And then we promise for next week's episode to have that information.
All right. Excellent.
And I guess, so now that I'm thinking about it, I should go ahead and plug at SQLDataPartners.com/podcast. You do have the ability to join our newsletter, and we can make sure that it goes out through those channels as well.
Yep.
So, okay, well, let's go ahead and get into the conversation here. So we're actually here at Compañero Conference, and you guys want to sit up down here? You get, let's sit. It'll be easier. And one of the sessions that came up, one of the interesting things that people wanted to talk about was a little bit of the question was how we got into consulting. And so I have Randolph and Jonathan here. And so we are going to have a brief panel discussion and I guess talk a little bit about it and then maybe open it up for questions or, however we decide to go. So first, we'll let you give the brief story of why you decided to become a consultant.
This is Randolph speaking. I became a consultant because I hate working full time. I hate the loss of productivity involved in case. So all day hearing people have arbitrary conversations that have nothing to do with work and not getting their work done. I hate the idea of a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 5 shift where you are expected to be sitting at a desk and looking at a screen or doing stuff when your productivity might be better later during the day or even at night in my case. So I found myself to be far more productive just working from home or finding a quiet space. There's a shared workspace that's in Calgary that I sometimes go to. And I can get more done in an hour of quiet time than I used to be able to do in a full day of working full time. So plus I get to choose my customers. I get to work as much as I like or want to, and I get to travel.
I'm going to give a slightly more PC answer than Randolph gave. There was a lot of hates in there. Right.
Intense dislike.
No, I became a...
Intense dislike.
No, I became a consultant because a lot of the same reasons that Randolph said too. For me, I hate to not be thinking. I know, right? I intensely dislike to not be thinking. And so one of the things that happened a lot of places is that you'll do a project and the project would be great, would be interesting. You'll do a lot of work and stuff too. And then it's these laws and those laws sitting at my desk, you can only read the internet for so long. And then you start getting bored. And when I got bored, it's just really bad when I got bored because I don't like to not be thinking. I'm always thinking. And when I can't control what I'm thinking about, then I begin to think about other things too. Like, how much am I getting paid? Right. So there's all kind of other things that would happen when I wasn't thinking. So for me, becoming a consultant allowed me to, as Randolph said, choose my customers, choose what I want to work on, be it to load up as much as I want, be it to take time off when I want, because, if I want to do work, I can do work. And, I do work in the middle of the night because I don't really sleep a lot. So it lets me add more work too. A company wants to go forth with a new product or not. I can choose what I want to work on. I can choose if I want to move more toward predictive analytics or if I want to move more toward visualization. It's my choice. So it allowed me to control my career and, be happy with it. Because it's literally, if I don't like the work I'm doing, that's my fault because I chose what I want to do. So that's the short story of how I got into into consulting.
So I've told this story a bit before. It's always been my desire to be an entrepreneur, right? The idea is very sexy, right? It's, we're Americans, right? We build stuff, right? We make our own, make our own things. And so we're Americans, right? We build stuff, right? We make our own, make our own things. My first company was actually like a computer repair, right? My partner, Jeff Morrison, called it Mortech. He kind of started it and I wanted to help him. And then that kind of fizzled out because, it just didn't work. You're always afraid. You're afraid to make that leap, right? Particularly in technology. Like, well, what if somebody asks me something I don't know? So that held me back for a while. And then I was working for a law firm. And I was in the position where I was seeing the contracts of these consultants that were coming in. And then you get to the point where they start coming to you for questions and you're like, And admittedly, some of them were in California, which was a bad basis, right? So I was seeing California rates coming in and I said, well, gosh, I'll do that, right? Like maybe it's time to make the leap. And the timing just happened how we started. And I think, I look back at that, and while the desire was there, and I had some semblance of what I wanted to do, or kind of seen what was there, I did not have a great footing or foundation of what it meant to be a business owner, and I wish I would have not waited, but maybe did things a little bit differently there initially. Okay, so Steve, you want to give us how did you get into consulting?
Well, I got into it a couple times. The first time, I wanted to try being a consultant. And this was, oh gosh, what year was it? I don't know, about 13 years ago now, maybe.
Okay.
And I sort of quit my job, hung out a shingle, and sort of started talking to people. And my previous employer ended up hiring me.
There you go.
And I ended up doing work for them. It was really kind of a weird consulting scenario because I ended up working for them almost exclusively for a year and a half or 2 years.
After you had been a full-time employee.
Right. And then when that gig came to an end, that was when I kind of learned a little bit about making sure that you don't put all your eggs in one basket with just one client. And I made rules for consulting from there on. And I broke them a few times, but then I ended up getting a couple other gigs with other clients and then ended up going full time with one of those clients as an employee, which took me out of the consulting ring.
Okay.
And then about 2.5 years ago was when I got back into it. So where I left that job and went full time. And for me, it was really, just jumping back in and wanting to work with different clients rather than the day job. And I think that I enjoy being a consultant because, it changes the dynamics of what you do every day. Today, I think, any day, I usually get up and I get started early. And oftentimes by 9 a.m., I've completed more work for clients than I ever would have in a full-time job by noon or maybe even by the end of the day. And it's just sort of the nature of consulting that allows you to do that.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting that I think a lot of clients or a lot of consultants will start that way. That was my experience as well with a former employer. And you get into it for whatever reason, and those rose-colored glasses help help you jump in. And then there comes a point where you're like, holy cow, what did I just do?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think from there, let's go and let's do challenges first, right? So challenges of consulting. So you mentioned lulls and kind of there's lulls at work. And I think there's definitely lulls in consulting, right? So so what are the challenges that you find being consultant?
Scope creep. So you sign up for a contract that's going to be, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then suddenly you're working 6 months. It's not a bad thing, but it may not be the work that you thought you were going to be doing. That's the good side of challenges that face you. The bad side is where you're not working for 6 months at all, which happened to me 2 years ago. And that's why I got more into acting and making films, because I had all the spare time. But the challenge is that I had to pay for it somehow. So I found myself compromising I only do performance tuning to start doing development again, because I used to be a developer. So I had to get back into that, and I was rusty. So the challenge is that I wasn't able to do the work that I wanted to do, but at the same time, I was keeping my old skills fresh. Well, so I always look for the upside there. And that's kind of how I got involved with a little company called SQL Data Partners. You may have heard of them. Good bunch of guys. The one's a bit odd, and then there's Carlos. Hi, Steve. I'm kidding. Carlos is the weird one. No, the challenge is that I didn't work for 6 months, and that was rough. I won't lie.
So since they've already touched on those challenges, I'll add another challenge too. And this is because we on our own, we work for ourselves. So another challenge too, this is something that I didn't realize until I was doing it, is people don't like to pay you when they say they're going to pay you. So it's one of the hardest things about making the jump into independent consulting is understanding that for that first month, 2, 3, depending on who your first client is, you may not get paid. You'll get paid, but you'll get paid down the line
when they want to pay you.
Right. So not just getting paid and stuff, but being prepared for that, and then to understanding how invoicing works and stuff too. A lot of my clients are really they help me invoice them, because it's there's a lot of things set up from QuickBooks, all kind of other ways to track your time and stuff like that too. But at the end of the day, being able to go through and invoice somebody and then being able to change the invoice on the fly if something happens, stuff too. For me, that was a struggle because that wasn't my strengths, so accounting wasn't really my strength. So I actually hired an accountant, let them do that. So there's a lot of ways to be able to, handle your business and stuff there too. Sometimes some people do it all by themselves and because that's a challenge, but there's help out there. So don't be overwhelmed, and you can even contact me. I'm sure Randolph and Carlos as well. If you got questions, you want to do it. I see your card, Randolph. I see your card. But you can be Randolph and I can be Mortimer, right? We can get our, and we'll make our normal $1 bet, right? So we're showing our age. But no, there's the challenges though. There's other challenges too besides just the getting the work and stuff as well as the stuff behind the scenes, the things that from taxes and stuff like that, and understanding the things outside of your normal day-to-day tasks. So those are some of the small things just to touch on that come with being an independent consultant.
Yes, you mentioned tasks, and so as an employee, unless you get to Kevin's level, right, or until you get to Kevin's level, you have people pretty much. I mean, I won't say they're not micromanaging, but there's a certain level of like obvious task that you've been given is to take care of the database, right? Maybe they're not giving you every single thing that you should do, but your task list is there and assigned. Once you then kind of make the leap, there's nobody giving you that task list anymore. Like there's no, the expectations are, we want you, make us happy. And well, what is that? How do you do that? And then the other struggle there is, what should your tasks really be? When you first start, you think you're kind of working again as an employee, you're like, you do anything, right? So performance tuning, you write a report, you go and talk to, whoever about their, connecting to a database, right? There's lots of, the breadth of your assignments is very wide. Now, as a consultant, it's slightly different because the idea of like, well, what value are you bringing? Initially, I was like, well, I'm a database person. You can hire me to do any database problem. And they're like, do any database problem. And they're like, well, what? Oh, I don't have a database problem. You're like, well, wait a second.
Let me find one.
yeah, exactly. And so I think coming up and actually kind of narrowing the scope a little bit, or having a well-defined set of what it is that you want to do is very difficult because you feel like all of a sudden, oh, my world is shrinking a little bit. But it's one of those things where you have to go down, take the think of Alice, right? When she takes the potion and shrinks down, you kind of have to shrink. You think about, and we could apply this to when you think of, for example, David Klee. What do you think about?
VM guy.
VMware, right? When you think about, Dave Pinal or Pinal Dave, excuse me, I have to edit that out. When you think about Pinal Dave, what do you think about? And that performance, right?
One blog post a day. One blog post a day for 10 years. That's what I think of Pinal Dave.
When you think of even some of the, so Patrick LeBlanc or, some of these other folks, there is one thing that they're kind of known for. Do they get to do lots of other things? Sure. But they have that one little niche. Or Jonathan. I think of Jonathan Stewart. What do I think about, right?
Visualization.
My hair.
Datafication.
But no, that's a good point. That's one of the things I was thinking about too and it actually falls right in line with the thing. So Randolph was talking about, he wants to do performance tuning, right? So as you figure out what you want to do, become known for something, brand yourself. Your branding is huge, right? And so I chose my hair to make my logo as my branding, but even still, visualization is my thing, although I do data warehousing and all kind of other stuff as well. So you have that niche that gets you in the door, and then you can do other things. But be known for something, and then you can do something, and then you can do other things as well. Because it's like what happens is that if you're just a generalist, nobody thinks of you specifically to do that one thing when that comes up. If you want to do that one thing, be known for that one thing, and then, oh, hey, we have X, Y, Z as well. You may not be able to do X, Y, Z, but then I can call Kevin, I can call Randolph, I can call Carlos to help me out do other things, right? But to get you in the door, be known for that one thing, be very good at that one thing, right? While Klee is known for virtualization, he does all kind of other stuff as well. But the virtualization has got him in the door because that's what he's known for around the world, right? When you say Klee, you think of VM, you think of, VMware changed their name as Kevin said Cleanware, right? Because that's what it's become.
That's right.
But that gets him in the door. That's his brand. That's what he's known for. But he's phenomenal with all kind of other stuff as well.
Sure.
Right. So be known for that one thing, but be able to do other stuff as well. So even with Randolph, like you said, he likes to do performance tuning, but he can do other stuff as well. So the performance
Growing into
Z and expand to Azure SQL database he can do all that as well. So once it gets him in the door, he can say, hey, I have these other services as well. But that's what got him in the door. That's his brand. That's what he's known for. So,
right. So I think some of the challenges, and I think some of the others mention this, things like scope creep. I mean, oftentimes you'll start on a project that you think is going to be one thing, and then after meeting with the client and understanding what they want, it ends up growing into 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 different things that you never even expected. And that can be good or bad, depending on how you look at it. I mean, it's good and then it brings on more work, but oftentimes it can be bad because one of my rules is never do more than, well, hopefully more than 30% of your time with any one client. So sometimes I'll break that and go to 50%, but when the scope creep goes to the point that they want you to be there as like all your time with one client, I just don't go for that because that's way too risky. Because when the relationship comes to an end with that client, you're sort of out of work at that point. So I kind of fight that scope creep by pushing back and prioritizing things, but then limiting my time amongst multiple clients, which I guess sort of brings up one of the other challenges that I've come across in consulting is when you're working part-time with teams that are working full-time, and oftentimes they kind of expect that you're on the full-time schedule they are, even though you're a part-time consultant, and trying to sort of balance there between the different clients so that you can be responsive as is needed, but also so you can spend the right amount of time with each client each week.
So we have another, Brian feels like you want to ask a question. You have a question?
What is the difference between a contractor and a consultant?
Well, a consultant, I feel, gets to choose what you want to do. A contractor gets told what to do. You still have billable hours and you still have to fill in a timesheet. It's all the same thing. It's just who you're working for is a little bit more blurry, because a contractor might work for a contracting house like I used to, and then I get told, you're going here tomorrow, you're going to work 6 hours, you're going to bill 8. Hey, I'm not going to lie. But that's the difference for me is the consultant is I'm helping you solve. But that's the difference for me is the consultant is I'm helping you solve a problem. A contractor is getting some job done for X number of hours. And the religious war comes in whether contractors are actually doing anything useful. And some are and some aren't. It just depends who you're with, I guess.
I think this goes to that idea of the branding and of what you're, and this idea of, are you being paid for your hands or for your brain, in a sense, right? So if you're being like brought in, here's the work we want you to do, I tend to think of that as the consultant or the contractor route, right? If it is, hey, I have this problem, how do you think we should solve it? Okay, now I'm inputting into the process, and I'm, and again, that's a generalization, but that's my delineation.
A contractor is like a staff aug person. You're filling a role, you're filling a spot, so they can just throw work at you. As Randolph said, you're being told what to do. Whereas the consultant is, solve a problem, help me solve a problem. You get into like management consultants stuff too. They're all helping solve problems. Whereas a contractor is somebody who's filling a seat for a specific time in a role. So does that?
Yep. There's nothing wrong with doing contract work if that's what you enjoy.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess that is an interesting point, right? So it's not like it's one is necessarily better than the other. What's your constraints? What's your box? Where do you want to be? And then that's going to make your decision there for you.
Usually you get a better paycheck if you're a contractor.
When it's feast or famine, right? Feast or famine.
I use the same approach, Wes, in regards to vendors. So we're getting ready to do an imaging project, and we sent RFPs out and getting ready to have them to come and do demos. And I look for things like contractor versus. We sent RFPs out and getting ready to have them to come and do demos. And I look for things like contractor versus consultant in the vendor aspect, who they're bringing. Are they going to help us solve problems or just put the imaging system in and leave? And so I think you can use it both ways in regards to if you're not interested in consulting like myself, you can still see that in the vendors you deal with.
One of the things too that a consultant has to worry about that a contractor doesn't, even though they can actually be the same person at the same time as well. But the consultant has to work on managing relationships as well, because that's at the end of the day, you don't want to just, as Doug was saying, you don't want to just come in and fix something, because that's the end of the gig there, right? I want to develop a relationship. So I'd rather spend 4 hours with you, every month than spend 5 hours with you one time up front just to do one thing. So that's another big thing there too. So
I think that, as a consultant, you're coming in based, where you're trying to come in and create something or fix something or come up with a solution. Whereas a contractor, you're punching time on the time clock. And not that you're not getting things done, but you're showing up and you're there on the clock for whatever is needed. And I think the comment was, are you paid for your hands or your brain? And I think that was a great analogy there, in that if you're there just sort of on assignment for a certain amount of time and you'll do whatever is needed in that time, that's kind of the contractor role. And when you're there to help get the job done, to focus on a specific task, then I think that's more on a consultant, where you're either building something or advising on something or coming up with solutions. And that consultant role is the piece I really like.
Right. And again, so if we didn't mention it, I should mention it here, that so neither is right or wrong, right? So the labels are not really important per se. It is, however, are not really important per se. I think it is, however, more of a philosophy of who's kind of driving the boat in the relationship, in the sense of, who's dictating what work will be done, right?
Yep.
And that can be a fine line sometimes. And I think, kind of going back to your comment about, the expectations, right, of the client dictates quite a bit about what role you're taking on there.
Right. And I think some of that comes from just what the client has been used to working with. If they've been used to working with a staff aug type position, where they get a body in who can work specific hours, that can be very different than getting in a consultant who's there with a specific specialty like we have to solve a problem or fix something or a performance or whatever it may be.
Kevin Fiesel, professional podcast guest. So you guys just talked about, it's better than being an amateur. So you guys just talked about brand, about building up a skill set, but I'd like to bring in the next question. As somebody who has absolutely no interest in doing consulting work, hello employers, how do you go about finding the particular customer? How do you go about finding the particular customers that you want to work with? How much of that is them finding you? How much of it is you finding them? What's the strategy behind that?
Most of my customers were from LinkedIn, which surprised even me. I thought I'd find people through word of mouth. Those were terrible customers, because what happened is somebody says, oh, you know computers. I know somebody who could use your help. And then you end up working on MySQL, doing index tuning. And then after 20 minutes, you've got no more work for them they do have, but they're only useful in certain contexts. But the point is that word of mouth turned out to be a very bad strategy. So LinkedIn, where I specified this is what I can do, this is what my company does, people who need it usually go there because they're business people. So they're looking for a problem solver, because I want people to associate me with the fact that I'm available to do almost anything, because the chances are 5% of the people will call me back. And then out of those, 1 or 2% of not of the 5, but 20% of those people will actually turn into a paying customer. So I have to go and do the whole mail shot or whatever so that I can get 1% back to actually pay me to do something. So there's a lot of targeted advertising I could do, but I don't have the time or the money to do that right now. And I don't want to, because I don't want to work full time.
Because if he worked full time, he'd never be able to play dead in TV shows and movies. Right. It's an acquired art skill. No, but I mean, that's so.
Cross the line there, John.
Don't you play dead with me, sir. But there's a wide gamut of ways that you can acquire customers. Like most of my customers are through I do partnerships with a lot of people, and a lot of people find me because I speak a lot. So I go places and stuff too, and people say, well, come up to them, I talk to them too. And a lot of these are business owners that have their own SQL practices as well. But it's like, oh, hey, well, we may want to partner with you to do, business intelligence. We may want to do visualization. Can you help me with this client that's doing such and such, right? So speaking is a great way to get your name out there, to be known for certain things. And so for me, like I said, a lot of my clients come through not just word of mouth, but from partnerships that people I've met on the speaking trail or met or heard me on SQL Data Partners podcast. Right. And I get people contacting me that way as well. Right. It's not really hard to find me because I'm the guy with hair. Right. See, it's a branding thing again. Right. But have a brand. Everybody has a way to be branded. You just haven't thought about it yet. So if you're really considering doing this, think of a way to brand yourself to get out there. And then there's multiple ways. Like as Randolph said, he gives his card to everybody. Anybody can give his card to, because that's a cheap way to advertise. Not really a cheap way because I'm flying everywhere to do this. But there's so many different ways. There's not just one way. You got to think outside the box, and there's more ways than we thought about. And so I'm sure Carlos has another way as well.
Write a book.
There you go. So
Nobody reads books.
I think we suffer. So initially, we tend to suffer. It's very similar to the idea of finding a job, right? How many of us have just taken a job that's come our way, right? Do we actually think about the industries that we want to work in, right? The type of people that we want to work with, right? The type of projects that we want to take. Yeah, we might say that like, oh yeah, I want to do, migrations to SQL Server 2017. But I think even, so at the conference, several people have mentioned, well, they approached me with this job. I wasn't really looking for it, but it paid me X% more than I was making. And so you take it, right? We have that, we fall into that same mindset. Yes, I guess we fall into that same mindset. Yes, I guess we want to spread the word. We want the cards are great, right? But ultimately it is trying to, with that niche, right? So finding what you want to do. We've had our best success then defining a vertical, which is healthcare, and then going after those people, right? And so it's, yes, we still I still hold the conference. I still do the podcast. Our healthcare people, in fact, I don't think there's any healthcare people here, right? So we're still doing things outside of healthcare, but from a marketing and like where we're going to look for customers, we spend all of our focus. In fact, we've actually even gone specific to customers of GE, right? And that's who we're targeting, right? Trying to establish those relationships, increase our network with, we want to become the SQL Server people for GE centricity customers.
Far more.
And once we do that, we'll go on to the next phase. So,
yeah. So I think finding customers, that's the hardest in the very beginning, because you start out, you have no history there other than with your full-time employer before that, perhaps. And you're trying to find customers. And I think that getting the onboarding process for a new customer the very first time always seems to take far more time than you ever expect, because that first customer is everything to you.
Sure.
And without that first customer, you have no income. You have nothing there. And then I've found over time, once you've got that first customer, as long as you're not breaking the rule of putting all of your eggs in one basket with just a single customer, the next customer is a little bit easier, because you have the work from the first customer to sort of subsidize the time while you're waiting for that second customer to get things signed. And then once you've got more customers, you end up getting in what their needs are. And I think there's some customers that you may work with that once you've found them, you're getting work every single week for years to come. And there's others that once you found them and you've done work with them, it may be you come back and work with them every 6 or 8 months.
Sure.
Depending on what their needs are. And I think that finding them, and I think a lot of it is really just the specializing, and I think in finding the customers who just come out and say, hey, I'm a computer tech guy, hire me.
Right.
That's, I think, the wrong approach there, because then you're competing with everybody that's a computer tech person anywhere.
Sure.
But if you specialize, like my specialization has been in database corruption. there's not a lot of people to compete with in that area. So that's an area that people find me now when they come across corruption. And because of that specialty, I'm able to take it on and fix them and get happy customers real quick like there. Or not always real quick, but generally as quick as we can.
Sure.
And the other area is like the database health assessment. A lot of that's come out of Database Health Monitor. Just getting your name out there, whether it's like what we do with the podcast, Database Health Monitor, or blogging. Just getting out there, social media, LinkedIn, things like that to get your name out as someone who very rarely when you're doing those kind of things will it ever turn into an immediate, like you do something and then within 24 hours you have work.
Right.
But it turns into you become that trusted name. And then 6 months or 2 years later, somebody remembers, hey, that's the person who specializes in that. Let's call him.
Yeah, it's definitely an investment, right? And you have to wait a long time for those returns sometimes. And, it can be very, very difficult.
Yep.
So. Okay. Well, thanks, Aaron, again for the question. I thought some interesting, insights and conversation. If you're interested in talking a bit about this more, maybe you have some one-off questions. Of course, we mentioned being at Summit, or you can reach out to us via any of our social media channels, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you, give some thoughts around that.
So one of the things that I wanted to do was call out an interesting comment that I liked from Randolph, where he was describing us at SQL Data Partners, and he says, one is a bit odd. And then there's Carlos. So thanks, Randolph. I love it.
The Pacific Northwest, it's the air,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess we should special thanks to Randolph and Jonathan for providing some insights there as well. Our music for SQL Server in the News is by Mansardian, used under Creative Commons. If you have other suggestions for topics or suggestions about things we should be talking about, you can reach out to us on social media. You can find me at LinkedIn. I'm Carlos L. Chacon.
Or you can find me on LinkedIn as Steve Stedman, and we'll see.
SQL Data Partners.